Question number 1 carrying 10 marks. With close reference to the short story, Jack London's Two Build a Fire bring out the conflict between instinctual knowledge and scientific knowledge, or primitive instincts versus theoretical knowledge and civilized understanding. This is one of the very important themes of this short story. This is a suggestion. Prepare this long answer. How will you write? How will you begin your long answers? Always begin with a good and interesting introductory sentence, and the introductory sentence must be directly associated with the question given. Two types of knowledge are discussed throughout Jack London's Two Build a Fire: instinctual knowledge and scientific knowledge. I'm not beating around the bush. I have directly associated my introductory statement with the question. This will show that I have understood the question, and then in the body, try to substantiate your answer and sum up in a proper conclusion at the end of your answer. Always underline the name of a literary text, or you may put the name of the literary text within quotation marks. The first, that is instinctual knowledge, is represented by a big native husky, the proper wolf dog. And the second, scientific knowledge, by its master, the protagonist of the short story. And then, right at the beginning, I have also used a quotation. Do not use incorrect quotations. You will be penalized. So, break longer quotations into smaller ones. And the second, by its master, the protagonist of the story. I have also mentioned that there is this conflict between the master, who is the protagonist of the story, and his dog. No beating around the bush. Compact, direct introduction. And then the significance of this conflict. They also show a larger distinction between nature and humans. Man versus nature is another important theme of Two Build a Fire. So, this is how this introduction is going to create an impact in the mind of the examiner. Learn this introduction. The introduction will vary according to the questions available. Do not just write down the summary. That will not be enough. You are in class 12 and now change the paragraph. Always change paragraphs while writing long answers. This is the second tip. The first tip, an interesting introduction. The second tip, change paragraphs. Let's read now. The man is a newcomer to the uninhabited Yukon area. A weather forecast of 50 degrees below zero is to him just precisely 50 degrees below zero. And here I have again used a quotation, just precisely. He is quick and alert in the things of life, observant, relies on logic and on tools and technologies, thermometer, matches and knife. I have started to substantiate my viewpoint. Why? I have written that there is indeed a conflict between scientific knowledge and instinctual knowledge in the story. And I'm starting to give examples from the text. Your answers must be written with close reference to the text. Textual references. The third tip to write a good answer, a good long answer. Next, at Henderson Creek, he knows he is 10 miles from the fork, calculates that he will arrive at the forks at 12:30 because of his 4-mile gait. All these details show his instinctual knowledge? Well, no. All these details show his scientific knowledge, his theoretical knowledge, and his civilized understanding. His lunch is packed in a handkerchief and lay against his naked skin to keep the biscuits from freezing. Another scientific knowledge. But his scientific or rational knowledge clouds his instinctual knowledge. Here comes the very important critical analysis. Scientific or rational knowledge clouds his instinctual knowledge. In this conflict, scientific knowledge has its limitations and gives him confidence in his ability to protect himself from the natural elements with the resource of fire. And this gives him confidence. Due to this confidence, he ignores the dog's instinctual knowledge. We have already mentioned in the introduction that the dog is associated with instinctual knowledge and the man is associated with theoretical knowledge, rationality, or scientific knowledge. Due to this confidence, he ignores the dog's instinctual knowledge that the weather is too cold to travel. This is the second paragraph. After writing about the man's scientific knowledge, it's time for us to analyze and explain the dog's instinctual knowledge briefly. The dog cannot understand or reason, but his instincts direct his survival throughout the story. A very important point which has to be mentioned in your answer. It is depressed by the tremendous cold. Again, I have made use of quotations. Possibly in its brain there is no sharp consciousness of a condition of very cold such as is in the man's brain, but it had its instinct is subdued by a vague but menacing apprehension. Textual reference. Direct textual reference. Use examples from the text in order to substantiate your answer. This makes it question eagerly. Another quotation. Every unwanted movement of the man. This is how I am building up my answer, and then I'll sum up in the conclusion. It bites out the ice formed between the toes as a matter of instinct. Everything that I have written is related to either scientific knowledge or instinctual knowledge. I have given examples, a few examples. This short story is quite lengthy and you need to be very careful about your word limit. Time management is crucial. Therefore, do not write everything that you know. Frame your answers judiciously. Be very clever while framing your answers. Write short, brief, compact answers to create an impact. When the man takes the creek trail up the left fork, the dog yearns back towards the fire. It knows it is not good to walk in such fearful cold. Despite the man's civilized understanding, he gets a wild idea to kill the dog, and his unusual posture arouses the dog's suspicion. And this suspicion is a part of his primitive instinct. His lack of imagination limits his knowledge. Another very important, significant point associated with the man's scientific knowledge. He lacks imagination, and this lack of imagination, this limited imagination limits his knowledge. The man's lack of bodily control shows that his practical, theoretical knowledge is very important, incomplete, without primitive instincts. Incomplete. A critical analysis. The conclusion of the story shows a triumph of instinctual knowledge. A triumph. Instinctual knowledge triumphs over the man's scientific knowledge. And the dog's primitive instincts prompt it to trot up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew to the other food providers and fire providers. So this is the conclusion. Triumph of instinctual knowledge and then the dog's primitive instincts prompts it to move towards the other food providers and fire providers after the death of the man. The man dies, but the dog survives. Let's quickly read the second question. With close reference to the short story To Build a Fire, comment on the relationship between the man and the dog. This is again a very important question. The answer now, again, an interesting introduction. The protagonist of Jack London's To Build a Fire is a solitary hiker who is accompanied by a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, as they depart from the main Yukon Trail. The introduction of the characters, the dog and the man, and a basic background information. Their relationship is not based on love and affection. Directly to the point answer. This shows that I have clearly understood the question, and this is going to fetch you good marks. There is no keen intimacy between them. This is again a textual reference. Everything is there in the text. Read the text thoroughly. There is no keen intimacy between them. They are not companions or friends. The dog is the man's slave, and both do not care for each other. Number 1, again number 2, number 3, the man is the master, the dog is the slave of the man, number 4, and both of them do not care for each other, number 5. So this will definitely create an impact. This will create a favorable impression in the mind of the examiner. And you will get good marks. Just trust me and follow our reference materials. We have plenty of them. Check the pinned comment section and you will get all the links. Now again, change paragraphs. The lack of care. This is the 6th point. There is no love and affection. Again, there is this lack of care as well. Between them is established when the observant man, suspecting danger from traps of hidden pools, compels the dog to go on in front, risks the life of the dog, shoves the hesitant animal who suddenly breaks through. The dog also is not concerned about the welfare of the man. Textual references, examples. Since this is a 5 marks answer, the length is going to be a little, this answer is going to be a little shorter, just a page. The dog also is not concerned about the welfare of the man. It is for its own sake that it follows his master without making any effort to communicate its apprehension to him. He is only his fire provider and food provider. It is the man's toil slave. When the man gradually loses his body control, he looks at the dog and feels jealous. In fact, he has a wild idea of killing it and burying his hands in its warm body. Also mention that the dog is suspicious of the man's intentions. So, suspicious of the man's intentions, and there is distrust. The dog's distrust. Mention this in your answer. Another key aspect of their relationship. The dog simply leaves the dead man. He simply leaves the dead man. There is no emotional connect between the two. To meet the other fire providers, food providers, showing lack of empathy. The dog survives and the man does not. This is the summing up. He simply leaves and the dog survives and the man does not. A simple answer, yet this is enough to fetch you good marks. Why is the man described as lacking in imagination? Is it a handicap? How? Or, with close reference to Jack London's To Build a Fire, comment on the theme of the power of imagination in the story. Imagination is an important theme. Let's analyze this answer now. The protagonist of the short story, To Build a Fire, is a solitary hiker identified as not being a thinker and as unimaginative. Again, directly to the point, introductory statement. Not being a thinker and unimaginative. He is quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things of life and not in the significances. This is a quotation. His limited imagination repeatedly causes him to underestimate the power of nature. This is the handicap. How? We will now see that. What is the effect of his limited imagination? What is the role of imagination in his life? It repeatedly causes him to underestimate the power of nature. This story is also about the conflict between nature and man. And this man's, the protagonist's, limited knowledge repeatedly causes him to underestimate the power of nature. And this is going to be his fatal flaw. Let's read the rest of the answer now. Fatal flaw: underestimating the power of nature due to lack of imagination. See how I have built up, how I have introduced my answer to build up my points in a logical, coherent manner. His imagination is limited, and now the reason why his imagination is limited: because all of his thinking is limited due to his scientific knowledge and civilized understanding. Again, the same theme, just like the first answer, but the framing of the answer is completely different, not just a mere summary. 50 degrees below zero means 80 odd degrees of frost. He is not intelligent despite being resourceful and practical. He is practical, he is resourceful, but not intelligent because of his limited knowledge, limited imagination. His theoretical knowledge clouds his instinctual knowledge. Now, the textual references, the examples to substantiate the answer. He is aware of the terrible cold but fails to imagine the possible outcomes of this cold. Let us now review this point. He fails to imagine the possible outcomes of this cold. He knows that it is cold. He has to carry appropriate lunch. He has to carry appropriate clothes, but he is unable to imagine the possible outcomes, the dreadful consequences of this cold. The man eventually dies. The dreadful consequence: he eventually dies due to his initial mistake of traveling on such a cold day, ignoring the advice of the old-timer on Sulphur Creek. His failure to imagine possible outcomes shows his lack of instinctual knowledge, connecting it to the theme of chance and human error, as he makes many mistakes without imagining the outcome. The examples now: as when he builds a fire under a snowy tree, or strikes all the matches at once. So there is this theme of chance and human error in the short story, and all these things are interconnected. His lack of imagination, his limited scientific knowledge, and the theme of chance and human error. Just go through this answer and you will understand this concept of imagination better. I will turn the page now. This is the next section. I have changed the paragraph once again. Always change paragraphs. At the end of the story, in the moments of his death, his imagination suddenly flourishes. Initially, he seems to lack imagination. This is the trouble with this man. But At the end of the story, in the moments of his death, his imagination suddenly flourishes. You must mention both these points. He imagines the boys finding his body in the snow. He pictures the boys, his friends, finding his body in the snow, and he contemplates the certainty of his own death. He also drifts onto another vision. This is the first vision, and another vision, the second one, of the old-timer on Sulphur Creek. He sees him quite clearly, warm and comfortable and smoking a pipe, a quotation. He, on the other hand, the comparison is numb, alone, cold, and death is inevitable. Imagination perhaps could have saved him. How is this a handicap, and how has this lack of imagination affected this man? Well, his death is the effect of his lack of imagination. This is definitely a handicap. These imaginative acts are linked to his acceptance of death. Before, when the man was focused on survival, he considered only the resources at his disposal. He did not care about the power of nature. He ignored so many things. Once he accepts death, he experiences a newfound peace of mind and drowses off into the most comfortable and satisfying sleep, that is death. Here I have explained the effect with the help of a quotation. The most comfortable and satisfying sleep, that is death. The summing up. Throughout the story, the dog's primitive instincts helps it more than the scientific knowledge helps the man. The dog survives and the man does not, highlighting the conflict between rationality and instincts, and the power of imagination is its crux. I am ending the answer again with a critical analysis of the power of imagination. I have begun with the power of imagination and I have ended with the power of imagination.